She used to believe that love could fix everything. When she was younger, she had dreamed of finding someone who would understand her heart without her having to explain it. But life didn't quite happen that way. Years of promises that faded, messages that stopped coming, and goodbyes that hurt more than they should slowly changed her. By the time she turned 30, she had quietly accepted that love wasn't meant for her. She stopped looking for it. Her days were filled with routines that gave her comfort. She woke up early every morning, made coffee, read the news, and left for work in a small design studio. She liked her job, even though it wasn't exciting. It gave her a sense of purpose, and that was enough. After work, she often walked home through quiet streets, listening to music. Her evenings were peaceful, sometimes a bit lonely, but she had learned to live with that silence. Friends tried to convince her to go on dates. They told her she was too young to give up, but every time she agreed to meet someone, it ended the same way. The conversation felt forced, the laughter fake, and she always went home feeling emptier than before, so she stopped trying. She told herself that she didn't need anyone to complete her, and for the most part she believed it. One Saturday morning, she decided to visit her favorite cafe, a small corner place that smelled of freshly baked bread and cinnamon. She liked sitting by the window, watching people pass by and letting her thoughts drift. It was her quiet time, the one part of the week she looked forward to. That morning, she brought her notebook, planning to write some ideas for a new design project. She ordered her usual caramel latte and found her spot near the window. The cafe was busier than usual. A group of college students laughed loudly at one table, and an older couple shared breakfast at another. She smiled softly, watching the little moments that made life feel alive. As she began sketching in her notebook, she didn't notice the small child running across the cafe until it was too late. A sudden splash of cold juice landed right on her dress. She froze, looking down at the orange stain spreading across the fabric. Before she could react, a man rushed over, clearly panicked. "Oh no, I'm so sorry," he said quickly, kneeling down beside her. He didn't mean to. He just got too excited. The little boy looked up at her with wide eyes, his lips trembling. "I'm sorry, miss," he whispered, clutching his half-empty juice box. She blinked in surprise, then smiled gently. "It's okay," she said softly. "No harm done." The man grabbed a few napkins and started dabbing at her dress awkwardly before realizing how it might look. "I'm sorry," he said again, pulling his hand back. "I should have been watching him." She laughed lightly, trying to ease his embarrassment. "It's fine, really. It'll wash out." Still looking flustered, he stood up and said, "Please let me buy you another coffee or something. It's the least I can do." She hesitated for a moment. Normally, she would have politely refused, but something about his sincerity made her pause. "All right," she said. "Just coffee." They moved to the counter together, and while he ordered, she studied him quietly. He looked a little tired, like someone who hadn't had a proper night's sleep in a while, but there was warmth in his eyes. The little boy stood beside him, clutching his father's hand, looking guilty. Once they sat down again, the man introduced himself simply and said, "This is my son. He's 5. He thinks every open space is a playground." The boy smiled shyly at her, and she couldn't help but smile back. As they talked, she found herself relaxing. He was easy to talk to, honest, funny in a quiet way, and humble. He told her about his work, about how he tried to balance being a single dad and keeping everything together. There was no bitterness in his voice, just an acceptance that life had changed and he was doing his best. She listened, curious but cautious. She wasn't used to opening up to strangers. But somehow, the conversation flowed easily. When she mentioned her work in design, his eyes lit up. "That sounds amazing," he said. "You must be really creative." She shook her head, smiling faintly. "Not really. I just make things look nice. Other people do the hard part." He tilted his head and said softly, "You sound like someone who doesn't give herself enough credit." For some reason, that line stayed with her. They ended up talking for nearly an hour, longer than she intended. The boy showed her his toy car, and she helped him draw a little track on her napkin. When it was finally time for them to leave, the man thanked her again. "You're really kind," he said. "Most people would have been upset." She smiled, brushing off the compliment. "It's just juice," she said. "No big deal." But as he walked away, holding his son's hand, she felt something strange, a quiet tug in her chest. She didn't know why. It was just a random meeting, a simple accident. Yet something about the way he looked back and smiled before leaving made her feel like she'd just experienced something meaningful, even if she couldn't explain what. The next few days passed normally. Work, errands, quiet evenings. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the cafe and that small boy with the juice box. She told herself it was nothing, just a nice memory of an unexpected moment. Still, when Saturday came around again, she found herself walking back to the same cafe without really planning to. She sat in her usual spot and opened her notebook. She told herself she was there for the peace and coffee. But deep down, a tiny part of her wondered if she might see them again. An hour passed. She was about to leave when a familiar voice said, "You're back." She looked up, startled, and there he was, holding a tray with a coffee in one hand and a pastry in the other. The little boy waved excitedly. She laughed. "You again?" He smiled. "We come here every Saturday morning. It's our little tradition." He placed the coffee in front of her. "I got this for you, caramel latte, right?" She blinked, surprised he remembered. "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," he said simply. They talked again, longer this time. She learned more about him, that he had lost his wife a few years ago, that raising his son alone had been both the hardest and most beautiful thing he'd ever done. He didn't complain. Instead, he spoke about it with a quiet strength that she admired deeply. Something in his honesty softened her. She found herself opening up too, sharing little bits about her life. How she'd been hurt before, how she'd stopped believing in love. He didn't judge or offer advice. He just listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel safe. When they finally said goodbye that morning, she felt lighter, like a part of her had exhaled for the first time in years. She walked home smiling without even realizing it. That night, she sat on her balcony, thinking about how small moments could shift something inside you. She hadn't expected to meet anyone that day, and yet somehow, that one spilled drink had brought warmth back into a corner of her heart she thought was gone forever. Over the next few weeks, she kept bumping into him and his son, sometimes at the park, sometimes at the grocery store, sometimes at the same cafe. It felt unplanned, almost as if life itself was trying to remind her that not everything needed to be forced. She began to notice little things about him, the way he crouched down to tie his son's shoes, how he smiled when his son laughed, the patience in his voice when he answered endless questions. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was simply being himself, a father doing his best, and somehow that made him more genuine than anyone she'd met before. And though she didn't want to admit it, she started to look forward to those moments. A short chat, a shared laugh, a small smile. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something real, something gentle. For years, she had built a wall around her heart, believing that love only brought pain. But this was different. There were no promises, no expectations, just two people crossing paths and slowly learning to trust again. As the days went on, she realized that maybe life had a way of surprising you when you stopped trying to control it. Maybe love didn't always arrive with fireworks or drama. Maybe sometimes it came quietly, through spilled juice, shared coffee, and kind words from a man who simply cared. And that thought stayed with her as she drifted off to sleep that night. The thought that maybe, just maybe, love hadn't forgotten her after all. The next few weeks moved gently, like pages turning in a quiet book. She didn't plan to see him again, but life had its own rhythm. Sometimes, when she stopped by the cafe for her weekend coffee, she would find him already there with his son. Other times, she'd walk in and see the little boy waving excitedly at her from across the room. It became something she looked forward to more than she wanted to admit. He would always greet her with that same warm smile, the kind that made it hard not to smile back. Their conversation started small, about coffee flavors, about the weather, about work. But little by little, they began to share more. He told her about his life as a single dad, how mornings were always a rush, how his son refused to eat anything green, and how bedtime stories had become their favorite part of the day. She listened, often laughing softly, finding comfort in his honesty. He didn't try to act strong all the time. He admitted when things were hard, when he felt tired, when he didn't know if he was doing enough. It was rare, she thought, to meet someone who wasn't pretending. One Saturday morning, the cafe was unusually crowded. There were no empty seats, so when he spotted her standing with her cup, he waved her over. "Sit with us," he said, motioning to the small corner table he shared with his son. She hesitated for a second, but then sat down. The boy grinned at her. "I remember you," he said proudly. "You're the lady with the juice accident," she laughed. "Yes, that was me." He nodded seriously, as if that confirmed something important. "Dad said I have to be careful with drinks now." His father chuckled. "And we're still working on that lesson." They all laughed, and for the first time in a long while she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Belonging. Not because of grand gestures, but because of how natural it felt. It didn't feel forced or awkward. It just felt easy. When the boy finished his hot chocolate, he started drawing on the napkins again, just like before. This time she joined him, sketching silly doodles and letting him name them. His father watched them with quiet amusement. "You're good with kids," he said softly after a while. She shook her head. "Not really. I've just never forgotten what it feels like to be one." He smiled at that. "Maybe that's exactly what makes you good with them." Their eyes met for a moment, just long enough for something unspoken to pass between them. It wasn't romantic yet, not really. It was more like understanding, like two souls quietly recognizing each other in a busy world. From then on, they saw each other almost every week. Sometimes they would walk together after coffee, just talking about life. Other times they'd sit at the park bench while his son played nearby. She found herself looking forward to those moments more than anything else in her week. One afternoon she asked, "Do you ever get time for yourself?" He smiled faintly. "Not really. But I don't mind. He's my world." He nodded toward his son, who was busy chasing a butterfly. "I used to think my life fell apart when his mom left. But then I realized maybe this is what I was meant for, to be his dad." She admired that. Most people talked about what they'd lost. He talked about what he'd gained. Still, she wondered what it must feel like to carry that kind of responsibility alone. She had her own loneliness, but it was a choice. His wasn't. They spent hours talking that day, the kind of easy, flowing talk that didn't need effort. She found herself telling him things she hadn't told anyone, about how she used to believe in love, about how it hurt to be let down, and about how she had stopped hoping for it. He didn't interrupt. He just listened. When she finished, he said quietly, "I get it. It's hard to trust again after being disappointed." She nodded. "It's easier not to try." He looked at her for a moment, then said, "Maybe. But the right person doesn't make you try so hard. They make you feel safe without you realizing it." His words lingered in her mind long after they parted that day. She tried to tell herself it was just a friendship, just two people who enjoyed each other's company. But deep down she could feel something shifting. Every time he spoke, every time he smiled at her with that calm, kind expression, something inside her softened. There was no rush, no expectation. He never flirted, never pushed. He was simply present, and that somehow meant more than any romantic words could. A few weeks later, she saw them again at the park. The boy was running around with other kids, his laughter ringing through the air. She sat beside his father on the bench, sipping her coffee. He sighed. "You know, I used to dread weekends. They reminded me of everything that was missing, but now, I kind of look forward to them." She glanced at him. "Because of him?" He smiled. "Because of moments like this." He turned slightly, meeting her eyes. "Because I get to talk to you." Her heart skipped for just a second. It was the simplest thing he could have said, but it felt sincere and it caught her off guard. She looked away, pretending to watch the children play, but her cheeks felt warm. Later that day, as they were leaving, the boy tugged at her sleeve. "Are you coming next time too?" he asked. She hesitated, then smiled. "Maybe. Promise?" he said, holding up his little pinky finger. She laughed and linked her pinky with his. "Promise." The boy grinned widely, satisfied, and ran ahead. His father chuckled. "Looks like you've made a new friend." "Looks like I have," she said softly. That night she couldn't sleep right away. She kept replaying the day in her mind. The laughter, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about his son, the gentle tone of his voice. She didn't know what was happening between them, but it felt right. It felt real. Over the next month, their bond deepened in quiet ways. Sometimes they'd meet at the cafe and talk for hours without realizing how much time had passed. Sometimes he'd bring her a small treat, her favorite pastry or a book he thought she might like. He remembered little details about her, things most people overlooked. She started to notice how much lighter she felt after being around him. The world didn't seem as dull anymore. Colors felt brighter, laughter came easier, and for the first time in years she found herself humming while making breakfast. One day when she arrived at the cafe, she found him sitting alone. His son was homesick, he said, and she could tell he was worried. They talked for a while, and when he sighed and rubbed his forehead, she reached across the table without thinking and touched his hand. "He'll be okay," she said gently. He looked at her, surprised by the gesture, then smiled faintly. "Thank you. You always know what to say." She felt her heart thump softly in her chest. "I just care." There was a pause, quiet but full of meaning. Then he said, "That means more than you think." After that day, she realized something had changed. What started as random meetings now felt like something more. A quiet bond neither of them had named, but both could feel. Still, she was scared. She had been hurt before, and the fear of losing something good made her hesitate. She tried to remind herself that he was just a friend, that she didn't need to read too much into it. But the truth was, she cared more than she wanted to admit. One rainy afternoon, she went to the cafe hoping to see him, but he wasn't there. She waited for a while, feeling oddly disappointed. Then, just as she was about to leave, he walked in, soaked from the rain, holding an umbrella that had clearly given up halfway. He laughed softly when he saw her. "I should have stayed home." She shook her head, smiling. "You look like you fought a storm and lost." "Pretty much," he said, sitting down. Then, after a moment, he looked at her seriously. "I was hoping you'd be here." "Really?" she asked. He nodded. "Yeah, it's been a rough week, and somehow talking to you makes things easier." She didn't know what to say, so she just smiled, the kind of smile that says everything words can't. They sat there for hours talking about nothing and everything, the kind of simple, real conversation that makes time disappear. By the time they left, the rain had stopped and the world felt quiet and new again. As they said goodbye, he looked at her for a moment longer than usual, like he wanted to say something but chose not to. She walked home with her heart full and light at the same time, wondering what exactly was happening between them. She didn't expect love. She wasn't even sure she believed in it anymore, but something about him, the way he listened, the way he spoke, the way he treated her like she mattered was beginning to change everything. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't want to fight it. Days turned into weeks, and she began to notice how much his presence had started to matter to her. It wasn't just about seeing him or spending time together. It was how she felt after, calm, understood, and strangely hopeful. She didn't even realize how often she smiled when she thought of him. Sometimes she would catch herself remembering his words or the sound of his laughter. It wasn't the loud kind of laugh that filled the room. It was warm and quiet, the kind that made her feel at ease. His words carried a weight of truth, the kind you didn't hear often anymore, gentle, steady, and honest. One afternoon, after finishing work, she decided to stop by the cafe. She didn't tell herself she was hoping to see him, but deep down she knew she was. The cafe was quieter that day. Rain tapped softly against the window and the smell of coffee hung in the air. She ordered her drink and sat in her usual seat. A few minutes later, he walked in, shaking off his umbrella, and when he saw her, that familiar smile appeared. "Looks like we both had the same idea," he said, walking over. She smiled back. "I guess we did." He sat across from her, and for a while they just talked. The kind of easy conversation that felt natural, as if they'd known each other for years. He told her how his son had built a fort in the living room, and refused to sleep in his bed for 2 nights straight. She laughed so hard her eyes watered. He laughed too, shaking his head. I'm just glad he didn't try to set up a campfire in there. When their laughter faded, silence filled the space between them. Not awkward, just quiet. He looked thoughtful, and for a moment she wondered what he was thinking. Finally, she asked softly, "Do you ever miss how things used to be?" He looked out the window, watching the rain for a moment. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "There are days I miss having someone to talk to at night, someone who understands without me having to explain. But then I look at my boy and I realize I have everything that truly matters." She nodded slowly. "You sound strong," he smiled faintly. "I'm not. I just learned that being strong doesn't mean not hurting. It means showing up every day anyway." She sat there quietly, his words sinking into her heart. She admired how he spoke, simple, real, and full of feeling. He wasn't pretending to be brave. He was just honest, and that made him feel even stronger in her eyes. As the rain grew heavier outside, the cafe grew cozier. The lights glowed softly, and the sound of cups clinking mixed with quiet music. She wrapped her hands around her warm cup and said almost without thinking, "You know, I used to think love was supposed to be easy, that when it was right, everything would just work." He leaned forward slightly.
And now?
"Now I think love just hurts too much," she said quietly. "It makes people weak. It takes too much out of you. I stopped believing in it a long time ago." He was silent for a while. Then he said softly, "Love doesn't always come to fix what's broken. Sometimes it comes to remind you that you were never broken to begin with." She looked up at him, surprised. "What do you mean?" He smiled gently. "People think love is supposed to save them. But real love, it doesn't rescue you. It sees you. It accepts you. It makes you feel like you're enough even when you don't see it yourself." She didn't know what to say. His words touched something deep inside her, a place she had locked away for years. The cafe felt still, as if the world outside had paused to listen too. He took a sip of his coffee and continued, "You've been hurt, and that's okay. It means you cared deeply. But don't let pain convince you that love doesn't exist. It just means you met the wrong kind of love before." His voice was calm, steady, and sincere. She could tell he wasn't trying to impress her. He was speaking from experience. That made his words even more powerful. For a long moment she just watched him. The way he sat there, relaxed yet grounded. The kindness in his eyes. The gentle way he spoke. It was the first time in years that she felt truly seen. "You really believe that?" she finally asked. He nodded. "Yes, because I've seen what love can do even when it ends. My son is living proof that love, even broken, can create something beautiful." Her eyes softened. "You're a good father," he smiled almost shyly. "I'm trying. That's all anyone can do." Something about his humility made her chest tighten. There were no fancy words, no big promises, just quiet truth. And that somehow meant more than any grand gesture could. They stayed there until the rain stopped, just talking. She told him about her parents, her childhood dreams, the silly mistakes she made when she was younger. He listened carefully, smiling every now and then, asking thoughtful questions. When she laughed at her own memories, he laughed too, and it felt effortless. Two people simply enjoying each other's company. When it was time to leave, he walked her to the door. Outside, the air smelled fresh and the streetlights reflected on the wet pavement. They stood for a moment under his umbrella, close enough that she could feel his warmth. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For what?" he asked. "For saying what you did," she replied. "About love. I haven't thought about it that way before." He smiled softly. "Then I'm glad I said it." She looked up at him, her heart suddenly full and uncertain all at once. She wanted to say something more but couldn't find the right words. So instead she just smiled, said goodbye, and walked away, her mind still echoing with his words. That night she lay awake staring at the ceiling, replaying the moment in her head. Love doesn't always come to fix what's broken. It comes to remind you that you were never broken to begin with. She whispered the words to herself, feeling tears sting her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief. Maybe she wasn't broken after all. Maybe she had just been waiting for someone to remind her of that. In the days that followed, she saw him again, and each time, something new stirred between them. Their friendship grew deeper. Their conversations grew more personal. She learned how he carried his pain quietly, how he still smiled even on the hard days. He learned how she guarded her heart, how she hid her fears behind strength. They never talked about what they were or what this was becoming. It didn't need to be defined. It just felt right. Natural, comforting, honest. One evening, as the sun was setting, they met at the park again. His son ran ahead laughing while they walked slowly behind. The air was cool, and the sky was painted with shades of gold and pink. She looked at him and said softly, "You've changed how I see things." He glanced at her curiously. "How so?" "I don't feel as afraid anymore," she admitted. "I used to think love was something to run from, but maybe it's something to learn from." He smiled, that quiet, knowing smile she was beginning to love. Maybe love isn't something we find. Maybe it's something we grow into when we're ready. She thought about that for a long moment. "And how do you know when you're ready?" He looked at her with gentle eyes. "When it stops feeling like a risk and starts feeling like peace." Her heart skipped a beat. Those words felt like they were meant for her, like he could see straight into her heart. She didn't answer, but her silence said enough. As they walked, the little boy ran up and grabbed both their hands, one in each of his. "Let's go this way," he said excitedly. They both laughed and followed him down the path. It was such a simple thing, walking together, holding hands with a child who trusted them both. Yet somehow in that quiet moment everything felt right. When they reached the park gate, the boy ran ahead again, leaving them a few steps behind. She looked at him and said softly, "You know, you're different from anyone I've ever met." He smiled. "Different good or different strange?" She laughed. "Good, definitely good." He looked at her for a long second as if wanting to say something more, but then he just nodded. "I'm glad." As they said goodbye that evening, she realized something had changed in her. The walls she had built so carefully were no longer as strong. His words, his kindness, and his steady presence had started to break through them. Not forcefully, but gently, in the way sunlight melts away the morning fog. And as she walked home, her heart felt lighter. She wasn't sure what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. His words had truly changed something inside her. For the first time in years, she felt open to whatever the world had to offer. Maybe it wasn't love yet, but it was the beginning of something beautiful, something real. The days that followed were filled with small, beautiful moments, the kind that sneak up on you and stay in your heart long after they've passed. She didn't even notice at first how deeply she had begun to care. It wasn't sudden and it wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like a soft song playing in the background of her days. Sometimes she would find herself smiling at her phone after reading his messages. Other times she would walk past the park and remember their conversations, the way his words carried warmth even in silence. He had become someone she trusted without even realizing when it happened. They didn't see each other every day, but whenever they met, it felt like time stopped for a little while. Their connection had grown stronger, not through grand gestures or deep confessions, but through the simple consistency of being there. One evening, they met at the same park where they often went. The sky was beginning to turn orange and the cool air carried the smell of fresh grass. His son was running around with a kite, his laughter echoing through the open space. She stood beside him, watching the child's joy. "He's really happy," she said softly. He smiled, his eyes following his son. "Yeah, he's my reason for everything." There was something about the way he said it, steady, full of love, that made her heart ache in the best way. She admired how he loved without needing recognition. He didn't talk about sacrifice or struggle. He just gave his heart freely. As they walked along the path, she found herself speaking without planning to. "You know, you've made me see things differently," she said. He looked at her curiously. "How so?" "I used to think life was about waiting for something big to happen. Love, success, happiness," she said slowly. "But being around you and your son, it's made me realize that maybe it's the small things that matter most." He smiled gently. "That's what I've learned too. Life's not about big moments. It's about the quiet ones that build who we are." They stopped walking for a moment, both watching the boy who was now tangled up in his kite string, laughing at his own clumsiness. He ran up to them holding the kite. "It won't fly anymore," he said, pouting. She bent down and took the string from him, helping him untangle it carefully. It just needs a little fixing, she said softly. Sometimes things don't work right away, but if you're patient, they do again. The boy smiled and hugged her quickly before running off again. She stood up, and when she met his father's eyes, there was something unspoken between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. They continued walking in silence for a while, but it wasn't awkward. It was peaceful, like they didn't need to fill the space with anything. Later, they sat on a bench near the lake. The sky had turned darker now, and the reflection of the moon shimmered on the water. The boy had fallen asleep on the grass beside them, wrapped in a small blanket. She looked at the sleeping child and said quietly, "He's lucky to have you." He smiled faintly. "I think I'm the lucky one." She turned to him. "You really believe that, don't you?" "Every day," he said. "I used to think my life fell apart when things didn't go as planned. But maybe it was just falling into place in a way I couldn't see yet." His words made her heart tighten. She looked down at her hands, tracing the edge of the coffee cup she held. "You make everything sound so simple," he chuckled softly. "It's not simple. I just stopped fighting what I can't control." They sat quietly for a few moments, listening to the sounds of the night. She could hear the crickets, the soft rustle of leaves, the gentle breathing of the boy sleeping nearby. Everything felt still, the kind of stillness that brings peace, not loneliness. After a while, he spoke again. "You've changed too," he said. She looked at him in surprise. "Me?" He nodded. "When we first met, you seemed guarded, like you'd built walls around yourself." She smiled sadly. "Maybe I did." He leaned forward slightly. "But now you smile more. You laugh easily. It's like you're letting life in again." His words touched her more than she expected. She wanted to tell him that he was the reason, but she didn't. Instead, she said softly, "Maybe that's because of the people around me." He smiled. "Then I'm glad I'm one of them." They looked at each other for a moment, and she felt something shift inside her, a warmth spreading quietly through her chest. It wasn't love declared, it was love felt. As the night grew colder, she stood up and helped him carry his son to the car. He thanked her, his voice low and sincere. When they reached her street, he parked for a moment instead of driving away immediately. "I hope you know," he said, "that you've made a difference in our lives too." She turned to him, surprised. "Me?" He nodded. "You bring peace. You remind me that it's okay to hope again." Her throat tightened. "I didn't mean to." "Maybe that's what makes it real," he said gently. That night, as she lay in bed, she replayed those words over and over. "You remind me that it's okay to hope again." She had spent years convincing herself that love wasn't worth the pain. Yet here she was, feeling something pure, something gentle, something that didn't scare her. But the next few days brought silence. He didn't show up at the cafe, and she didn't see him at the park. At first, she told herself it was fine, that people got busy. But as days turned into a week, she began to worry. She tried to stop herself from overthinking, but she missed him, more than she wanted to admit. The cafe felt empty without his laugh, and the park seemed quieter without his son's voice. Then one evening, as she was leaving work, she saw him outside waiting by the corner. His face looked tired, and his usual calm expression carried a shadow of worry. "Hey," she said softly. "It's been a while." He smiled faintly. "Yeah, I'm sorry. Things have been a bit hard lately." She frowned. "Is everything okay?" He nodded slowly. "Mostly. My son's been a little sick. Nothing serious, but it's been long nights." Her heart softened immediately. "You should have told me." He looked at her gently. "I didn't want to worry you." She shook her head. "You don't have to handle everything alone." For a moment, he didn't speak. Then he said quietly, "That's what I'm used to." Without thinking, she reached out and took his hand. "You're not alone," she said softly. He looked at her, his eyes tired but grateful. That single touch said more than any words could. It wasn't romantic. It was something deeper. Connection, understanding, care. From that night on, she started visiting more often. She brought soup for his son, helped with small things, stayed for dinner sometimes. It felt natural, like she was meant to be there. He never asked for help, but he always looked thankful when she came. She never tried to do too much, she just showed up. Sometimes that was all someone needed. As the days went on, they grew even closer. They shared stories late into the night, laughed over small things, and sat quietly when words weren't needed. She saw the strength in his gentleness and the courage in his honesty. And she realized something. Love didn't always arrive with grand gestures or passionate declarations. Sometimes it came in the shape of quiet moments, helping hands, and soft words. But just as things began to feel safe and steady, she felt fear creeping back in. The closer they grew, the more she feared losing it. One evening, she found herself pulling away slightly, making excuses, avoiding the cafe, not replying right away. He noticed. One day when they met at the park, he looked at her with quiet concern. "You've been distant," he said gently. She looked down. "I just needed some space," he nodded slowly. "I understand." But she could hear the sadness in his tone. After a long pause, he said softly, "You don't have to run. I'm not here to take anything from you. I just want to walk beside you." Those words broke something inside her, not in a painful way, but in a healing one. No one had ever said that to her before. She felt tears fill her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's just hard to believe someone won't leave." He smiled faintly, reaching out to wipe a tear from her cheek. "Then let me prove it. One day at a time." And right there in that quiet park under a soft evening sky, she felt something shift again. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid of love. She felt ready, not because she was certain, but because he made her feel safe enough to try. As they walked home together, she realized that maybe love wasn't something she had lost. Maybe it had just been waiting for her to open the door again. Time moved slowly, gently, as if it too wanted to savor the quiet moments between them. After weeks of small gestures, long conversations, and shared laughter, something inside her had changed completely. She no longer doubted that love could exist in her life. Not the flashy, dramatic kind from the movies, but the real, steady kind that grew day by day. It started in small ways, noticing his smile before anyone else did, feeling lighter when she was around him, and looking forward to the weekends they spent together. She noticed the way he listened to her without judgment, the way he spoke to his son with patience and warmth, and the way he simply showed up day after day. One Saturday morning, she walked to the cafe with a sense of calm she hadn't felt in years. The sky was clear, and a soft breeze carried the scent of fresh bread from the bakery next door. She ordered her usual coffee and sat in her favorite corner, expecting nothing. But then she saw them, him and his son, already at the window table, smiling as if they had been waiting for her. Her chest tightened in a way that made her realize just how much she cared. "Good morning," he said softly, his voice carrying the same warmth she had come to recognize. "Good morning," she replied, smiling. The little boy waved enthusiastically, and she waved back. They spent the morning laughing over small things, spilled sugar packets, silly drawings, and stories from the week. The child ran around happily, his laughter echoing in the cafe. She realized that she had never seen him so carefree, and it made her heart swell. As the morning passed, they stepped outside to walk in the park nearby. The sun was warm on their faces, and the world felt calm and beautiful. For a while, they walked in silence, simply enjoying each other's presence. Finally, she spoke. "I never imagined life could feel like this," she said softly. He looked at her curiously. "Like what?" "Like peaceful," she said. "Like I don't have to protect my heart all the time. Like I can just be." He smiled, the kind of smile that made her feel safe. "That's exactly how it should feel," he said. "You shouldn't have to fight to feel comfortable with someone." They reached a small bench by the lake, and the child ran ahead, tossing pebbles into the water. She sat down beside him, feeling a quiet happiness she hadn't thought possible. "You've changed me," she said suddenly. He raised an eyebrow. "Me?" "Yes," she said, looking into his eyes. "I didn't expect love to ever find me again. But you've shown me that it can. Not in a dramatic way, not with fireworks, but quietly, gently, and it's enough." He reached out, taking her hand in his. "I didn't do anything special," he said. "I just showed up. And maybe that's all it takes." She squeezed his hand, feeling a warmth that spread from her chest to her fingertips. "No," she said softly. "You did more than show up. You made me believe again." He looked at her for a long moment, his gaze steady and kind. "I'm glad I could," he said. For a while they just sat there, letting the world move around them. The child's laughter, the gentle breeze, the sunlight on the water. Everything felt perfect in its simplicity. She realized that love didn't need to be dramatic or overwhelming. It could be found in quiet mornings and shared smiles and someone who truly saw you and stayed. As the weeks passed, their bond grew stronger. They shared more dinners together, more walks, and more quiet moments that didn't require words. She helped with small things, reading bedtime stories, preparing snacks, or simply keeping him company when he was tired. She never felt like she was intruding. He always welcomed her with warmth and gratitude. One evening, after a particularly long week, she arrived at his apartment to find him sitting on the couch, his son asleep beside him. He looked exhausted, but when he saw her, a small smile appeared. "Hey," she said softly, sitting down beside him. "Hey," he replied. "You're just in time for some quiet company." She nodded, feeling a sense of contentment wash over her. They didn't speak much that night, just sat together, enjoying the comfort of being near each other. She realized that this was what she had been missing for so long. Not excitement or drama, but peace, understanding, and genuine care. Over time, she noticed how naturally she fit into their lives. She became part of their routines, part of the laughter, part of the small moments that made life feel meaningful, and in turn he became part of hers. She didn't feel afraid anymore. She didn't feel the walls she had built around her heart. One afternoon, while walking through the park, his son ran ahead, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers. "For you!" he shouted, handing them to her. She laughed softly. "Thank you. They're beautiful." He smiled at her, quietly watching the moment, and she felt her heart swell. In that simple act, she understood that love could be found in everyday things, in gestures of kindness, and in the care that people gave without expecting anything in return. That evening, as they walked home together, he reached for her hand. She looked at him surprised, and he smiled. "I want you to know," he said softly, "that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I just want to be with you. Every day if you let me." Her eyes filled with tears, but she smiled, squeezing his hand gently. "I've never been more ready," she whispered. From that day on, things felt different. She didn't wake up hoping for love to find her. She woke up knowing it had in the quietest, most beautiful way. She had found someone who cared, someone who stayed, someone who showed her that life could be gentle and full at the same time. They celebrated small milestones together, birthdays, little achievements at work, and simple victories like finishing a challenging project or baking a cake that turned out just right. Every moment, no matter how small, felt richer because it was shared. One weekend, while they were walking through the park with his son running ahead, she stopped and looked at him. "Do you ever think about the first time we met?" she asked. He chuckled softly. "The juice incident?" She laughed too. "Yes, if I had known that one little accident would change everything, I never would have believed it." He smiled, taking her hand in his again. "Sometimes the smallest moments have the biggest impact." She nodded, realizing how true that was. That tiny, unexpected encounter had led her to him, to his son, to a life she hadn't dared to imagine. Over time, their love grew, not because it was sudden or fiery, but because it was patient and kind. They didn't rush. They didn't feel the need to define every moment. They simply lived it day by day, moment by moment, building trust, understanding, and a bond that was unshakable. She found herself laughing more, feeling lighter, and seeing the beauty in small things again. The fear of heartbreak had faded, replaced by a quiet confidence in the goodness of love. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of her apartment, watching the city lights glow softly in the distance, she rested her head on his shoulder. "I never expected this," she said quietly. He kissed the top of her head. "Neither did I," he whispered. "But I'm glad it happened." They sat together in silence, feeling the warmth of each other's presence. For the first time in years, she didn't feel broken. She didn't feel lonely. She felt loved, seen, and safe. And as they watched the city lights flicker in the distance, she realized that love had quietly found its way into her life. Not through grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but through kindness, patience, and the simple truth of someone who cared. She didn't expect love. She had stopped hoping for it. But he had shown her that love wasn't about searching for it in the right places or waiting for it to arrive in a perfect moment. It was about noticing the people who were already there, showing up, and choosing to stay. That night, she went to bed feeling peaceful. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel the need to protect her heart. She didn't feel the old fear that had haunted her for years. She felt ready to love, ready to trust, ready to live, and she knew without a doubt that this time love was here to stay.